The female supremacy movement, known as feminism, has driven the sexes apart by successfully weaponizing women against men.
I'm reading, fuckface.
This includes, but is not limited to, the instituting of affirmative action, where meritocracy is thrown out the window in favor of equality of outcome and forced gender quotas. Here, men, and especially white men, lose out in the jobs market and in university placements. But it's not sexist or racist or anything, because as we know, it's not possible to be sexist or racist against men, apparently. There's obviously been a political incentive for powerful institutions and politicians to acquiesce to the demands of feminists who engage in hysterical moral outrage, who lobby for things like tighter online media censorship, speech control, and the micromanagement of everyday social interactions.
I think it's important to recognize that harassment is, as someone had mentioned, it's not just what is legal and illegal, right? Harassment is threats of violence, but it's also the day-to-day grind of you're a liar, you suck.
Apparently women are super strong, independent, and don't need no man. Or do they? Because feminists believe they're triggered by everything from occasionally getting interrupted, like everyone does in real life.
There are sometimes microaggressions, right? Like people who will just cut you off. And you'll be talking and then someone will interrupt you. And so that's actually become like a big pet peeve of mine. So whenever like somebody interrupts me, I'll be like, wait, I was talking.
Air conditioning also suppresses women, apparently.
It's just such a relief to know that there's actually proof that this is happening, that women, do feel the cold more than men, and that the AC in offices is normally regulated more for a male's temperature than a woman's.
And it's an explanation for these constant battles you'll see in offices right across the country between the sexes for control of their office thermostat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one of the biggest problems is that often in offices, it is men who control temperatures. That's just something I've found anecdotally.
And compliments on the streets are a form of patriarchal harassment, sexism, and oppression. Who knew?
How are you this morning? Have a nice evening. Nice. Beautiful. God bless. The sexy American Eagle.
So women don't need any help and can smash the glass ceiling all by themselves, except they're knocked back by unconscious bias.
Now ask yourself, when you think of scientists at major universities, do you call up a room full of women? Probably not. That's unconscious bias.
When you think of a room full of school teachers or nurses or healthcare workers or people who work with the elderly, do you think of a room full of men? Probably not. That's unconscious bias.
Microaggressions, invisible subsurface sexism, and are somehow impacted by a man spreading his legs on public transport, condescended to by mansplaining, and triggered by men standing up to pee. So you'd better make it illegal for a man to do that in a public restroom. Ladies, I've said it before, you really don't want these unhinged feminists speaking on your behalf. The collectivization of your gender into the hive mind of third-wave authoritarian feminism has not only made women increasingly lonely and less happy with each passing decade, but has turned many men off dating women entirely, a phenomenon known in the West as the sexodus. The truth is, feminists not only hate men, they hate their fellow women, and they've become the modern-day Puritans and moral busybodies. It was Lavranita Beria who said, "Show me the man and I'll find you the crime." And we haven't even got started on the biased divorce and child custody court system. But I specifically want to focus in this video on the shaming of men's natural sexual attraction to women and the complicity of governments and the legal system in pathologizing masculinity. Nottinghamshire police to count wolf whistling in street as a hate crime. Force becomes first in the country to adopt a separate category for misogynistic incidents in attempt to tackle sexist abuse. The narrative being here, of course, that misogyny is rife, all men are potential sexists, and women need state protection. The trouble is that the more feminists push for the state to intervene and protect them against these bullshit non-problems, the less freedom all women will enjoy in the future. You can't demand more security without sacrificing your freedoms and personal autonomy. But I'm not sure feminists really care. They honestly can't deal with the freedoms they have, and I think There's something very sick about these people, potentially something buried within their subconscious that almost wants a patriarchy to exist, which is obviously ironic. Is it any wonder leftists import a barbaric, genuinely misogynistic outgroup culture into the West with completely incompatible values to our own? They treat these migrants like children in a kind of instinctive maternalistic manner. It's as if feminists hate being in control. They wish to surrender their sovereignty and freedom to the state so that at least control will no longer be in their hands. Without even realizing it, they're pushing for the return to a more traditional gender hierarchy with men at the top, but a very extreme form of it. The problem is the system they'll actually end up advocating for will be unbelievably authoritarian and oppressive, but it will be a patriarchy. Already, an unholy alliance between feminists and Islamists has begun, with the likes of Sharia advocate Linda Sarsour being held up as a feminist hero and the hijab as a symbol of women's liberation. You can probably gather there isn't much in the line of rational thinking or logical consistency going on here, but non-feminist women have got to realize this and resist this with everything they have. Men and women need and depend upon each other and must work in unison to defeat any ideology that would drive them apart or oppress and demonize either of them. I think what feminists are communicating without realizing it, what feminism is showing us, is that women want men to lead, despite what they say about workplace equality and women's independence. And it's hardly surprising when you think about it, when you consider that men are naturally more wired to lead, to be the hunter-gatherer, the provider, as it were, more inclined towards taking charge, overcoming obstacles, breaking through barriers, accomplishing things, competing, and fighting. These are masculine characteristics. There seems to be a desire within these feminists to place women in a more submissive role. And many of these feminists are probably not even consciously aware that this is what they're doing. I think this is the reason they attack men as much as they do, to try to contrive dangers in the world where they don't exist, and thus encourage the state to make women a kind of protected class. They may not be more free, but they will technically feel more safe and protected from men by men. After all, women only have as much freedom as the men in their society can provide. The notion of women being independent, well, they are less dependent on men, but they become more dependent on the state. But that isn't going to be enough, because naturally men and women are drawn back to each other and want companionship. And they want it with clear differentiations between them in terms of gender roles, with the woman and the man taking on their own unique roles within the family. And I think that's where you'll see women in the future no longer opting for a career and choosing motherhood instead. That is, after all, the most important job that a human being can do, raising the next generation with a high degree of parental investment. Both parents in work with their kid in daycare is far from optimal and extremely unnatural for a woman who is driven by maternal instincts for good reason. But in the meantime, we will have crazy-ass stories like this to contend with. France to outlaw sexist remarks in bid for equality between men and women. Catcalling and other forms of sexist verbal abuse and harassment will soon be outlawed in France, the latest governmental effort to correct the age-old problem of male domination. Well, I'm not condoning something so tacky as catcalling, but is this really necessary for the government to begin legislating for everyday social interactions on the streets like this? Whistling considered sexual harassment under university policy. At Tennessee State, whistling in a suggestive manner may lead to expulsion. Tennessee State University warns against whistling in a suggestive manner on the grounds that it may constitute sexual harassment, a policy that has helped to earn it a red light rating from one of the nation's premier college watchdog groups. Basically, women are being told by feminists that a guy isn't admiring you, he's assaulting you by whistling at you. Anyone remember the 90s when we used to focus on actual problems as opposed to making shit up and trying to throw every guy in jail just for the crime of expressing interest in a woman? The public university in Nashville currently holds a red light rating from the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education for several of its policies that effectively allow officials to punish various forms of free speech as harassment. Among them, the public university's discrimination and harassment policy warns employees and students that whistling in a suggestive manner could get them sanctioned, including being expelled or fired if officials deem the tune sexual harassment. It's certainly very positive to see many leading figures in Hollywood exposed in the recent sexual abuse scandals. However, feminists have now been contriving a wider narrative of sexual assault mania in our culture. They've definitely made the most of it and used it to encourage more misandry and gender division. We're witnessing a return to sexual puritanism and the further demonization of innocent, playful flirting by men toward women. Every interaction between a man and a woman can be scrutinized through a feminist lens and reinterpreted as somehow inappropriate, offensive, or threatening. And the first thing to go under this new puritanical regime? Fun. Office Christmas parties, no hugging, kissing, flirting, or dancing allowed. Sounds fantastic. The traditional Aussie office Christmas party, this article is from Australia, just got a lot more tame, with experts warning the days of drinking, flirting, and telling your boss what you really think are long gone. 'Tis the season to be merry, careful, with etiquette experts, moral busybodies, saying the rise of feminism and silence breakers have had a massive impact on what behavior is appropriate at festive functions. Social advisors, what kind of a job is that? Social advisors say people should be cautious whether an innocent greeting hug is appropriate, as affection can be interpreted in different ways. No shit. So basically, most everyone previously knew where the line was in these kinds of social settings with respect to acceptable behavior, but now everyone is afraid to so much as look at each other in the eyes because no one knows where the line is anymore. It's constantly being moved back and forth along an ever-changing spectrum. A Christmas party should be enjoyed by all who attend, but it should be treated like a professional work function. It is never appropriate to flirt, touch, or say disrespectful words to anyone at work, except, of course, if a certain someone in the office harbors a mutual interest in you also, in which case they may very much want you to flirt with them. But hey, we couldn't have human beings behaving in an authentic and organic way, could we? Instead, every guy should be carefully walking on eggshells for fear of being hauled over the coals by HR on Monday morning. The problem with flirting is it can be interpreted in a variety of ways. What is fun and laughable to some may be very embarrassing or threatening to others. So keep your hands to yourself, don't even go in for a hug or kiss if you haven't done that before, and stay professional through the entire occasion. This is such basic bullshit advice that it sounds like it was written by an alien from another planet who's completely unfamiliar with human behavior and social norms. And to me, this is the problem because it's the same thinking behind the concept of affirmative consent, where men are expected to continuously stop and ask for permission from a woman for every single thing they do during sex, when in reality, consent is given by a lack of resistance from the female and a series of non-verbal cues, as evidenced in the animal kingdom. Having to practically sign a waiver at every step during sexual activity kind of kills the mood a little bit. And anyone who believes that sexual intercourse could possibly work like this has either never had sex and is indeed from another planet, or is just trying to be a killjoy and police other people's behavior. So, as you might imagine, in order to keep themselves safe, some men are opting out of dating women entirely, and they're retreating into video games and porn, and even sex robots now, for God's sake. And when they do this, they're then told that the use of sex robots somehow normalizes rape culture, epitomizes the patriarchy, underscores male aggression, is a form of violence against women, and reinforces dangerous gender stereotypes. So, whether men interact with women or whether they stay the hell away from them, they're damned and condemned either way. Men cannot win. But here's the thing that feminist and non-feminist women need to understand. Men will survive and overcome this. It's in their nature. Women will not fare quite so well in the future, unfortunately, assuming this demonization of men continues. The expectation and contrived notion that women should rise to the top of the corporate ladder and have it all is bullshit, and everyone knows it. And because of the nature of hypergamy, corporate career women are finding that it's pretty lonely up there because there's fewer and fewer men of comparative economic standing. So what happens? Well, these women don't tend to marry below their economic position, so they end up complaining that there's no good men left and they spend their life with cats. In Japan, this is so bad, where the so-called herbivore men have opted out of dating women entirely.
What is it that's missing in women's lives that would make them hire someone like you? Why do they need you?
あくまでも大事なのは涙を流すっていうことが大事。
Women around the world are gaining economic independence, and Japan is no exception. Rather than dealing with the exasperating issues of relationships and marriage, women are turning to a newly emerging industry of companionship. These modern services offer men for hire and provide elements of the boyfriend experience a la carte. Single women in Tokyo can now fulfill their romantic needs for a price on demand and by the hour.
Do you notice things changing at all as time goes by? Do you think that women in Japan feel more confident and more able to be emotional, to express emotions?
女性の方がその辺ガッツがあって今は強いですよ。
やっぱり女性が強くなってきた一つとしてそういう恋愛の影響はあるのかなとは。
So as you can see, the genders have been very much driven apart, but it's clear that despite this damage, men and women still have a need for each other in some form, for companionship, and they're inventing the most ridiculous artificial means possible in order to achieve this. What I'm going to put forward next is going to sound a little bit ridiculous to some people. I know other people have talked about it, but just go with me on this one. It's a disturbing, hypothetical, dystopian future, but if sex robots ever do become indistinguishable from real women, which I doubt is going to happen anytime soon, but if they did, disenfranchised men would probably end up seeking companionship that way, kind of like the holographic girlfriend from Blade Runner 2049, only in physical form. These men will have jobs and provide for themselves and their household alone and make do with a loyal, loving synthetic female that they find attractive. But I don't think women will derive the same sense of satisfaction from an artificial male. The reason I say this is because women will still have to provide for themselves. There won't be a man there to do it. And women are naturally inclined towards caregiving and maternal instincts rather than providing. A male sex robot obviously can't provide for them, so they'd still have to work full-time in order to provide for themselves and their child, obviously. As you can see, this scenario does not restore the traditional gender dynamics of the man as the provider and the woman as the caregiver homemaker. Even if she uses a sperm donor to get pregnant, who's going to help support her and her child? The state? That would just encourage more single mothers. And when the artificial womb arrives, men will just use that to reproduce with. Now, obviously, we're taking a hell of a lot on faith here if we're to assume that future female robots will become so super intelligent with sophisticated AIs that they would be able to keep a home and raise a child. That could be hundreds of years away. But it is interesting to think about the consequences of exploring these concepts, however ridiculously far-fetched they currently may seem. I think some men might be okay with coming home to a feminine, dutiful robot wife that's indistinguishable from the real thing, but not so much for women coming home to a masculine robot. Anyway, I happen to have a lot more hope that this absurd robotic future actually will not occur. I don't see it happening. I think the reality is that long before these robots become perfected, the gender dynamics will have been restored between men and women, and the reason I believe this is because we're already witnessing a natural return to conservative and traditional lifestyles, where it's become much more accepted to identify as a conservative. Liberalism has had its day, and it's currently in its death throes, and feminism is following closely behind. Finally, guys, if you appreciate this kind of content, please consider sharing this video and subscribing to my channel and clicking that bell icon thingy to keep notified of my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.